Hi, my name is Michelle Ronksley-Pavia. I'm going to be presenting a mini lecture on the 10 essential skills for classroom management. Hopefully by the end of this mini lecture you have a really good understanding of the 10 ESCMs or essential skills for classroom management, including the balance model. So we have the language of expectation, language of acknowledgement, language of correction, and then the 10 micro skills that sit under those. So through the management focused language that we have around the 10 essential skills and this balance model, we're focusing on the expectation, acknowledgement and correction. So expectation, what teachers say and do to articulate the acceptable behaviours in the classroom. Acknowledgement, so what teachers are saying and doing to support students in behaving appropriately, so in a positive way, in terms of working through tasks and working with other students in the classroom and wider as well out in the playground. And then correction, so the language around correcting students. So what teachers say and do to redirect students and interrupt off-task behaviour in particular. So we've got what we call the balance model. Through that language of expectation, we've got the language of acknowledgement, and then we've got the language of correction. So if it's tipped too far to the language of correction, then we're making too much in our classroom management towards correcting behaviour. So if we're under pressure or we've got students with challenging behaviour. So an imbalance or too much corrective language can be especially detrimental to students who have learning, emotional, behavioural difficulties, often creating a negative cycle of interaction that's quite ineffective and is wearing on both you as the teacher and the students. So on the other hand, an imbalance of too much acknowledgement can mean behaviours which should be corrected are left uncorrected and go unchallenged. So that often tends to lead to confusion amongst students about what your expected behaviours are in terms of what you want from your students. So we work towards more of a balanced model. So language of acknowledgement and language of correction. It's not skewed one way or the other. So here's an outline of the 10 essential skills. So under the language of expectation, we've got 4: establishing expectations, giving instructions, waiting and scanning, and cueing with parallel acknowledgement. Under the language of acknowledgement, we've got body language encouraging and descriptive encouraging. And under the language of correction, we've got selective attending, redirecting to the learning, giving a choice, and following through. And we're going to unpack each one of these in turn around what it looks like in the classroom, its purpose, and how it can be used. So looking at the language of acknowledgement. So the first essential skill for classroom management is establishing expectations. So this is about making sure that you as the teacher have clearly articulated and demonstrated the boundaries of expected behaviour in your classroom. So you've created, usually in conjunction with your students, depending on the schooling context, some rules, and you've got a shared understanding of those rules. So the rules are available, displayed in the classroom or in student diaries or bookmarks or stickers or so forth. They're short and simple and they're stated positively. So instead of saying don't arrive late, we're saying arrive on time for the start of class. Instead of don't call out, we're saying put your hand up for help. So you discuss the rules with your students. You refer to them frequently. You talk about possible consequences for infractions of the rules that you've all agreed upon. It's something that you can point to if it's a poster or something in students' diaries when the rules aren't being followed. It may be that you have a series of questions that you work through before students are sent to the RTC or what else it might be in terms of the discipline that's practiced in the school context. But it's really important that as a teacher you model, you demonstrate what following the rules looks like. So students all have a shared expectation, understanding of what you mean when you ask them to do a certain thing. So as we can see here, Mrs. Munter liked to go over a few of her rules on the first day of school. No wearing weird clothes, no dumb questions. What is not ideal about Mrs. Munter's rules from what we just looked at in that previous slide? Are they positively stated? Are they encouraging and supportive of students? The second essential skill for classroom management is around giving instructions. So how you give instructions in your classroom, how you convey what it is that you want students to do. So the purpose of giving instructions is obviously to give clear direction to your students about what they are required to do, what your expectations are for a particular task. So depending on the students in a class, adding additional non-verbal cues to accompany any verbal prompts may further aid in their understanding. So some students might be confused if you provide too much verbal and non-verbal information at once. So make sure that when you're giving instructions, you're very clear. Stop and look to the front, thanks. Or eyes on me, thanks. Again, depending on the school and context that you're in, primary or secondary, you might have something like a hand clap. So in primary schools, sometimes they have a hand clap that goes like this. And then all the students do. And then they stop and they attend to what the teacher wants to tell them. Or the teacher might have a hand signal and everybody has an understanding when they see the teacher or teachers at an assembly or with their hands up like this, then the students must be quiet and they all must raise their hands as well. And usually that goes around the student group pretty quick. When you're about to give instructions, you need to make sure that you have the focus of the students on you, that they're all attending to what it is that you want them to be attending to, which is you at that point in time. So in terms of giving clear instructions, the first part of that is waiting and scanning. And that's skill 3 that we'll look at in a moment. When students' attention is focused on you, then you start to give the instruction. And you start with a verb. You keep the instructions very short and precise. So if you want students to look at you, then the verb is look here, thanks, or look at me. Whatever it is that you want them to do. Put your pencils down. Attention here, thanks. Make sure that you're not interrupting your content delivery with a lot of instructions. And your instructions should be phrased as a direction rather than a question. So there's an example here. Instead of saying, would you like to copy the sentence year 4? Or can we stop working now? You're making the assumption by adding thanks that they're already cooperating. So stop working, thanks everyone. Stop working, thanks year 8. So if you get in the habit of phrasing instructions as a question rather than a direction, students might think it's optional for them to follow the instructions that you're wanting them to follow rather than doing the requirement that you want. So it's critical that teachers focus on giving instructions that inform students about what you want them to do rather than what you don't want them to do. So instead of saying, don't run around the room, you tell students, sit on your chair, thanks. So you're being positive in how you're framing it and you're instructing them with the information of what you want them to do rather than to stop doing what it is that you don't want them to do. So I've talked about using thanks rather than please at the end of your instructions. It implies compliance. Sometimes please might be appropriate as well. Give your instructions in a firm, calm, and measured voice. Use now if the group or student is unlikely to comply, for example. And there's some examples here. So an initial instruction, David, look to the front, thanks. If he doesn't respond or his behaviour deteriorates, you can say, David, look to the front now, thanks. Calm and measured. So you're not raising your voice, you're not shouting, you're not yelling. So you're being really calm and affirming. If you're giving instructions through a series of steps that you want students to follow, it's always a really good idea to write them up on the board as well. And students should know that when you're giving your signal, whatever it might be, your hands up, you're clapping, or standing in a certain spot in the room, that the expectation is that they're attending to you. So some other tips around giving good instructions here. 1 to 2 instructions at a time in a firm, calm voice. Use proximity, that is walking slowly towards a group of students who perhaps haven't attended to you yet, making eye contact. Use the student's or the group's name. So year 8 or a particular student. We talked about beginning with a verb, avoiding requests. Allow some processing time. So you need to take up time for students to process the instructions that you've given them. And that's particularly important for students in your classrooms in terms of allowing them some time to hear what you've said, process it, and then act on it. So if you count to 10 in your head after giving an instruction to a student, that should be sufficient, depending on their diverse learning needs, for them to be able to process it and then act on the instruction. You might have some visual aids that you can use, a poster or other indicators of what you want students to be doing. Reinforce your instructions. Give some acknowledgement when your instructions have been followed and adhered to. So the next ESCM is number 3, is waiting and scanning. So after you've given an instruction, so year 8's eyes on me, thanks. Remain quiet and look at your students and scan the room, 5 to 10 seconds. Does everybody stop what they're doing? Is everybody looking at me? Maybe some students aren't attending. Perhaps you're just going to look over at them. I'll say, thank you everybody, thanks guys. Particular student still not attending. Thanks David, thanks Sarah. When everybody's looking at you, just pause. Then you can start with your instructions. So it's really important to use waiting and scanning, making sure that you're assertive in your body language. You're facing the group, you're scanning the class, you're prompting students that you're about to give them an instruction, or you're about to get them to start working, or something along those lines. You could also link it with the descriptive encourager, as I've just talked about there, or a redirection that we'll talk about in a moment. So waiting and scanning is a really important skill, because it gives students time to process the information. So it indicates non-verbally to your students what your expectations are for them in terms of what's coming up. Be careful, especially when you're beginning to teach, that you don't try and fill that pause time, that quiet time as you're waiting, scanning, with talk, because that takes away from your expectations of what students should be doing, and that is focusing on you, waiting for the instructions that you're giving them. So don't be afraid of pauses or silent moments, particularly under this skill when you're waiting and scanning. Pause when everybody's paying attention, begin your instructions. Don't begin talking to students until everybody is listening, because if you're allowing a certain group of students to quietly whisper to each other or to be talking or slightly off task, then you're actually conveying that your expectations are that that's acceptable. So by waiting and scanning and not beginning any instructions until everybody's paying attention to you, that is conveying your expectations to your students. I'm not going to start giving you instructions. We're not going to start this fun activity or whatever it is until everybody's listening to me. And usually you get students that nudge each other and say, teacher, teacher. And they stop talking. There's a video here for, which is really good. So Bill Rogers talking about how to calm and focus a group of students through waiting and scanning. And he talks through a really good technique involved in this essential skill as well. So make sure you go and have a watch of this in terms of settling and focusing a class ready for you to give instructions. ESCM 4 is cueing with parallel acknowledgement. So you're scanning the class regularly after you've given instructions. You're checking that students are on task. You're acknowledging individual students or groups of students who are on task to students who may not be on task. You're acknowledging that individual or group so that others will pick up on that. So for example, you've got a group of students, you've just given instruction when you want them to start copying, I don't know, the learning intentional success criteria off the board. Most students have started, or most groups of students have started. You've got a couple of students who haven't started over here, but there are some students next to them who've started. So you could say, Sarah, David, great to see that you've got your book out and you're copying down the learning intentions. Thank you. That cues the other students to what you actually want them to be doing. Oh, I better get my book out. I haven't started yet. And then allow them a little bit of time to begin, and then say, you know, great to see, Tony, that you're writing down the learning intentions and success criteria. So just loud enough for other students to hear that and hear that acknowledgement. And there's some other tips on there as well in terms of how to use it. So the purpose of this skill is to acknowledge on-task behaviour with the intention of encouraging other students to mirror or copy that behaviour. So it's a really effective management skill because it cues other students to match the behaviour that's being acknowledged. It's also an alternative to a redirection, so it can help you to avoid nagging or becoming too prescriptive in terms of telling students what to do. And it also contributes to a positive tone in the classroom. So another example, if Jenny's off task during a writing activity while sitting next to Mark, who is on task, you say to Mark, I can see Mark working quietly on his writing, great. This prompts Jenny or other students who may be off task. So you can pay attention to how you use your tone of voice with this particular skill around cueing with parallel acknowledgement. So think about the tone of your voice, acknowledging individuals or groups of students who are on task, and being aware of peer pressure issues when publicly acknowledging students, especially with upper primary and secondary students. So with older students, your tone should be more matter-of-fact or neutral rather than a higher pitched encouragement tone, which is often used with younger children. So be aware with your tone of voice and how you're using your voice, particularly under this skill. The fifth ESCM is body language encouraging. So the purpose of this skill is to encourage students to engage with and remain on task through the use of teacher proximity. So that's you being close to students to encourage them. Things like body gestures, facial expressions, and so on. So body language encouraging is an effective student management skill because it doesn't take any time. Again, it promotes a positive tone in your classroom. And body language, as we know, is an integral part of communication. It strengthens relationships with your students if it's done well. And it promotes on-task behaviour when used intentionally. So you've given instructions, students have begin a task. As the teacher, you move around the room. You circulate around the room using non-verbal signals to students that they should be working on the task. Walk near all students around the room in your class. You can do things like just touching the work of students who are on task. Pause after you toured the room. Maintain minimal teacher talk. Then walk slowly towards students who might be off task. They see you coming and they quickly like, oh, I better start what I'm doing here. And that gives them a prompt often to get back on task. Smile and make eye contact. Acknowledge appropriate behaviour. Great to see. You can just, you don't need to actually speak. You can just sort of go. Students know that they're doing the right thing. So your intentional use of encouraging body language helps students in terms of sending some positive messages to them. So discrete nodding movements, finger signals, and so forth. So by moving around the room, interacting non-verbally with students, the teacher's level of classroom monitoring increases. So your with-itness as a teacher increases and should help reduce episodes of inappropriate behaviour with the students in your classroom. So ways not to use body language encouraging are really important. Don't stand too close to students. It can be intimidating, especially with older students, upper primary, secondary. It can promote hostility or provoke hostility. You could prompt, correct, pause and walk away and then just check, visually check back. Don't walk too fast towards a student because that can, make them instantly want to fight or flight. Again, depending on your students and knowing your students, don't hold eye contact or come into a stare at kind of challenge. Don't show any kind of irritation by tapping your foot or drumming your fingers or crossing your arms and frowning. If it's irritating to you what the student is doing, their behavior, remind them of the rules. Redirect their behavior positively. You can selectively attend, as we'll look at in a moment, skill 7, around their behavior as well, in terms of what you pay attention to and what you don't pay attention to. So skill number 6, descriptive encouraging. So descriptive encouraging is all about facilitating greater student awareness of their social, behavioural and academic competence by describing exactly what you want to see or hear from them that you hope to see more frequently. So it's a useful management skill for a number of reasons. It describes to students the behaviour that will enable them to learn. It reinforces the rules and the expectations that you've set up through ESCM 1. It promotes a positive, supportive learning environment. It focuses on strengths and builds student self-esteem. And it stimulates students to take academic risks, and they become more able to display the courage to tackle difficult work through persistence and metacognitive skills around self-control as well. So it tells students about their competence and it helps them succeed in their learning in terms of directing them. And again, it helps to strengthen your relationship with your students. So describe exactly what you want to see or hear from your students. Stephen started the task. This group over here is on task. Fantastic. You're using respectful, measured tone of voice rather than exaggerated tone. So students will soon pick up if you're not being genuine. So it might be directed towards individual students privately. It might be more publicly. Again, depending on the year level, upper primary, secondary, sometimes there can be some peer pressure around being singled out positively and or negatively by the teacher. So be careful in terms of that. Make sure that you know your students. So this skill seems a lot easier to master than it actually is. And like all of these skills, will take practice. So make sure that you're paying attention to the timing of how you use this and your tone of voice. So this is a skill, like all of them, but this one in particular, that you'll need to intentionally practice. So when you go out on your professional experience placements, make sure that you're practicing these skills, that you're drawing on these ESCMs as part of your toolbox or your repertoire of positive student classroom management techniques. How not to use descriptive encouraging. So don't give any conditional praise. Things like, great work, why didn't you do that all along? How's that going to make a student feel? Imagine if somebody said that to you. It's really good to see you writing neatly. Now I know you can do it. You should be doing that all the time. So making sure that you're being specific in your descriptive encouraging. Great to see that neat writing that you've got there. Now we move into the language of correction in our balanced model. So skill number 7, selective attending, and we just touched on this one briefly before. So the purpose of selective attending is to attend to on-task behaviour and refrain from giving attention to unsafe, off-task or inappropriate behaviour. Bill Rogers gives some really good examples of this in the next little video they've got in this presentation. So this is something that you do when students are displaying off-task behaviour or inappropriate behaviour, but it's not seriously disrupting or disturbing others in their learning. You're keeping the student in your peripheral vision. So you're not taking your eyes off them, but you're not staring at them either. So you're not turning your back on them. You're hoping the student's going to come back on task. So you might be able to give a descriptive encourager. You might be able to say something positive or point to parallel acknowledgement and acknowledging a student nearby who's doing the right thing. So describe what you want the student to do through the descriptive encourager. When do you need to stop using selective attending is if the behaviour becomes dangerous or it pulls other students into it and comes off task as well, or it keeps going on for too long. So selective attending is an effective management skill because it avoids unintentionally reinforcing off-task behaviour or disruptive behaviour. This decreases the likelihood that the behaviour will be repeated and also decreases the likelihood that it's going to spread to other students. So think about how to handle student behaviour in a productive, positive way. It gives you time as the teacher too to attend to and pay attention to other students who are on task. And it sends a message to students about your expectations. It's a powerful modelling tool because it implies that I can stay focused on my work despite the disruption. So it's important to note that there's a difference between ignoring and selective attending. So ignoring inappropriate behaviour might imply that you as a teacher are not aware of that behaviour and that you're accepting it. That somehow you're tacitly condoning that behaviour. Whereas selective attending requires you as the teacher to consider the inappropriate behaviour being demonstrated and act immediately if student safety or other safety is being compromised. So selective attending might involve subtle signalling to students who are displaying appropriate behaviour that the inappropriate behaviour of others is being noticed, and the teacher is deliberately choosing to pay little attention to it. So that has a really powerful modelling effect of the behaviour and the expectations that you want. And in this next video, Bill Rogers talks about tactical ignoring, which is pretty much the same thing as selective attending. And he gives you some really good examples in this video of how to do that, with kids that are fiddling with the blinds and all those kind of things. So I encourage you to watch this with some other tips from Bill Rogers in there. So what might a student be doing that you would make a choice not to use selective attending? So when the duration of off-task behaviour is short and it's not serious or disturbing other students, it's not appropriate to respond if it's unsafe, or if it is unsafe, you need to respond straight away. And if the student has resumed the appropriate behaviour, but they're not going to repeat it, or they're less likely to repeat it for whatever reason. So we've got some selective attending going on here. The class was quietly doing its lesson when Russell, suffering from problems at home, prepared to employ an attention-getting device. And there he is at the back setting up his speakers there. So some selective attending. I think we'd be paying attention to that pretty quick smart. So ESCM number 8, redirect to the learning. So using a verbal redirection to students to their learning. So a student is off task, the period of off-task behaviour is getting longer, or they may become disruptive, ask a question about the set task or ask questions related to something else. So think about if a student is off task and they're talking to somebody sitting next to them. You could say, Sarah, what question are you up to? Or Sarah, are you working on the writing task now? Or you might offer some assistance to a student. You might have a non-verbal redirection to the learning. So the student's off task, the off-task behaviour is getting longer, or they're disrupting other students. You might use body language encouraging. So you might move closely, gestures or facial expression. So if you've got a group of students or a couple of students who are off task, just you walking over and using your proximity as a teacher could be enough to prompt those students to go back on task and to engage in the learning that you want them to be doing. If students resume the on-task behaviour, use a form of low-level acknowledgement so that you're actually acknowledging that they've resumed the on-task behaviour. You're not going to state that out loud, because then that might prompt them to go back into the low-level off-task behaviour. So the purpose of redirect to the learning, ESCM 8, is to respectfully prompt students who are off task or disrupting others, initially with a redirection to the learning. So this can be verbal or non-verbal. So a redirect to the learning is an effective student management skill because it provides a least intrusive, positive learning-focused prompt to resume on-task activity. So hopefully reducing the need for further correction. it puts the responsibility onto the student, and it reinforces the importance of on-task behaviour, the expectation of what you want. When linked with giving a choice, it reinforces to students or groups of students your expectations, the likely consequences of the choices given. If a student maintains their off-task behaviour, you can redirect them to the learning again, allowing for some take-up time. And obviously, again, this is going to vary with the developmental levels of your students. Redirect them, giving a specific instruction about the appropriate behaviour that you would like the student to demonstrate. Again, allowing some take-up time. Offering teacher assistance. Do they need some help with what they're doing? And giving a choice if necessary. So it's really important that when you're using ESCM 8, redirect to the learning, that you avoid making a redirection sound like a threat or a punishment. And remember the impact of body language, the tone of your voice, your proximity and facial expressions when giving a redirection to the learning or choice. This all impacts on whether a student is going to comply or not. It's important to be calm, clear, firm and positive in tone, and keep your talking or your language to a minimum. Okay? You don't want to engage a student in a backwards and forth or start an argument or anything. It's about redirecting them to the learning. So here's an example of probably how not to do that in Summer Heights High and Jonah in his English classroom. So I'll let you go and watch this little snippet for a moment, how not to redirect the learning. ESCM number 9 is called providing choice. So choices may have positive options or be positive in how you frame them. So it could be that you're going to stay back at the end of the class or the end of the lesson to support students. It might be students have begun to seriously disturb a class after a redirection from you. So the student might be engaging in some secondary behaviour, so sulking or doing something like rocking in their chair or interrupting. So if a student is overly hostile to you and is challenging your management, and you can't think of less intrusive options, and it's clear to you that students' inappropriate behaviour is escalating, then it could be time to provide a choice. So the purpose of ESCM 9 is to respectfully engage a student who is disruptive and explain their choices and the logical consequences of if they continue to choose to behave how they're behaving. So, Chris, your choices are, and you might experiment by adding with on the end, which would you prefer? Then pause. Chris, your choices are to continue with the work or go to the RTC, the Responsible Thinking Classroom. Which would you prefer? And allow Chris some time to resume on-task behaviour without you engaging in more teacher talk. Wait a short while, so pause. Allow for a short delay, some thinking time. Don't stand close to the student and stare at them. If they respond to your direction and then go back on task and you believe it's appropriate, use a low-level verbal or non-verbal encourager in close proximity to the student. And you've got to read the situation if that's appropriate or not. You could acknowledge the student discreetly by not using loud or attention-gaining verbal or non-verbal encouragers at this point. So for the whole class, Year 8, you can choose to start now or later. The first 2 questions have to be finished before lunch today, or you'll need to stay back to complete them. If anyone needs help, please let me know. Or Susanna, the choices are move over here near the window and you'll be able to join us, or stay there on your own. Make your choice now. So the most important factor in this skill is thinking carefully about the choice to be given. So before you come up with choices, pause to allow yourself some thinking time. Don't give a choice that you can't or won't follow through on, or that you're not able to follow through on. And avoid giving a choice sound like a threat or a punishment, which is an easy mistake to make. To avoid escalating situations, allow students to have some thinking time or some take-up time where they can actually respond to the directions that you're giving them. And it's really important here that you're not escalating the behaviour. And some schools have clear processes in place for providing choice and around questions that you have to work through before you can send the student to the office or the RTC or wherever it might be. ESCM 10 is our final one, so follow through. And this is about actually following through in terms of what you said you're going to do. So it's about demonstrating confidence using appropriate body language and a calm, firm voice. Do what you planned and said you would do. You need to make sure that you're actually following through on your planned action in response to extended off-task behaviour. So if you've said through the choice that if the student doesn't comply, you're going to be sending them to the RTC, you need to send them to the RTC. If you don't consistently enforce your expectations and follow through on what you said you're going to do, students will soon pick up on that and they'll just keep playing up because they know you're not going to do the follow through and follow up on what you said you were going to do. So if there's ongoing disruptive behaviour, it's seriously disturbing the learning environment of other students, you would be using follow through. So it's an effective management skill because it clearly establishes that you mean what you say. It models assertive behaviour in the face of off-task or escalating behaviour. So follow through is necessary when all other skills haven't been effective. So behave as if you're confident, even though you might feel really unconfident or nervous or uncertain. So often it's the certainty of the consequence rather than the severity of the consequence that is important in terms of ESCM 10 following through. So how to follow through? Avoid letting your embarrassment about what others might think about you erode your confidence. Consider removing the whole class if you think that there's safety concerns or the behaviour is escalating to a potentially dangerous level. And most schools have a crisis plan or some other kind of plan in their responsible behaviour plans about what to do to send for help if in the unfortunate event that it does escalate. Reassure the class and work on your self-control if you lose control. It may look and feel disturbing to other students, so do it in a way that establishes and reinforces the rules, and students will understand that you mean what you say. So students will understand where your expectations are and what's expected of them. So they understand the boundaries and they understand what happens if they cross over those boundaries. So this is a really important skill that you're following through on what you said you're going to do. So that brings us to the end of this mini lecture on the 10 essential skills for classroom management. So hopefully you've got a really good understanding now, or at least a toolbox or a repertoire of skills that you can draw on in your professional experience placements and also in your own teaching practice. So thanks for watching.